taking over. Your elephant, remember, is driven by your emotions, by ease and routine and so on. Your elephant starts saying, hey, I'm a bit tired, I've got other things that are prioritizing. And as you can probably imagine, what happens then is that it can go either way, obviously. Perhaps your rider says, no, elephant, come on, we're going to do this. Perhaps your elephant's like, nah, do you know what? I'm really tired. My work is actually much busier. You know, it's the 5th of January. I'm back at work now. Just don't have time for this. Your emotions and the habits of your daily routine take over and divert you from that task. Alternatively, it might be that you love the yoga so much, your elephant, your emotions, are so positive about the yoga that actually you build it into your routine. Before you know it, by the end of January, it becomes a habit. Bless you, Lauren. It becomes a habit. And once it's a habit, you know, it's part of your elephant's daily routine and your elephant is on board with it. Then if we think about that same analogy, there are things that you can do to shape the path to make it easier. So in that case, I was talking about home yoga there, but how different would it be doing home yoga versus going to the gym? Well, it should be the case that you have no excuses for not doing your home yoga because you don't have to literally leave your front door. But actually, as we all know after this year, there are lots of excuses that you can find not to do exercise at home. So what are the different things there? So is it that your dog, and they'll seem like silly things, is it that your dog wants you to go for a walk first thing? Is it that the kids are already up and you have to give them breakfast? Perhaps it's that your house is quite warm in the morning and you just don't feel like exercising, or you're feeling a bit groggy because it's January and it's winter and it's miserable. Or perhaps your internet connection's bad. You know, all of these things that change how easy it is to do things. So in short, basically, your rider is the kind of planning and logic side of making a change. Your elephant is the emotional side, driven by the habits and so on. And the path is the physical or social environment around you that makes it easier or more difficult for you to conduct the change. So what we're going to do now is to split back into our groups. Hopefully that makes sense to you all. I'm just going to check the chat to make sure that I haven't confused the hell out of anyone. Jackie says it's fabulous, a great way to consider motivations. Good, I'm glad that you thought that. Yes, and someone has mentioned the Chimp Paradox as well. It's a similar analogy to the Chimp Paradox. So some people talk about it like the elephant is actually a bit like a kind of naughty chimp brain. I know I just used the word naughty in relation to an animal, but just, you know what I mean. So basically, the part of your brain that's, you know, that's just like, oh, I just want to do my own thing. I'm not going to bother with this boring human logic about I know I should sit at my desk or whatever. Yes, so what we're going to do is go back in the groups and with the same issue. So again, the first groups 1 to 20 are going to think about, you're going to go through that list of reasons people are buying exotic pets without thinking too much about it first. And you're going to look at each of those reasons and think about which of those reasons are to do with logic and they're rider reasons. Which of those reasons are to do with the elephant and they're to do with emotions, habits, social pressures, how easy something is, and which of those reasons are to do with the path, the physical or social environment, which makes it easier or harder to perform a behaviour. And groups 21 to 40 are going to do the exact same job, but with your list of reasons about why people are using punishment and dominance to train their animals. So again, are the reasons that you've got to do with the rider? Are they to do with the elephant? Are they to do with the path? Some of them will cross over between them, and that's okay. And we'll come back and share our ideas in a moment. So I hope that makes sense. If you haven't been in a group before, I believe it will happen automatically, so don't worry, and hopefully the other people in the group will help you. And if you have any issues, you can get me on the chat. Yeah, just message and I will try and help you. So Lauren F, would you be so kind as to magic us away again, please?
Yes, I'm gonna try.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen again now? Brilliant. Okay, so let's share what we found. So for anyone, just in case you just joined, or if you were really confused by that, so what we were planning there was we were going through the welfare issues that we've looked at, and we were thinking about which issues are to do with the rider. So which issues are to do with like rational knowledge, planning, knowledge, and so on. Which of the issues are to do with the elephant? So about your emotions, habits, traditions, comfort, ease, and which of the issues are to do with the path, so the social and physical environments around us. So let's have groups 1 to 20 start off. So for you guys, we had that long list of reasons that people were buying exotic pets without thinking it through enough to start with. So perhaps you could start us off by saying, were there some reasons that were to do with the rider there that you felt? We thought there were lots of elephants making the decision. Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, would you like to elaborate on that? Tell us about your elephants. Tell me about your elephants.
I might just speak instead of type, Tam, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, all the reasons that we wrote down in our group, they're all quite emotional based, and we thought when it comes to animals, actually, people do lead a lot with their emotions. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't think of many rider examples at all from what we had. Mm-hmm. So things like, I don't know, the badge of honor, the rescuing the animal, whether it's a bit edgy or they just really love animals and just mm-hmm. a big fan of exotic species. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we couldn't I don't know if anyone else has many rider ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, thank you, Lauren. I think that's what's coming up in the chat as well. So people saying predominantly emotion, so elephant-based ideas, but perhaps the rider, if you were thinking about maybe breeding the animals in future. So if you were like, oh, cool, I'll get a snake and then breed it or whatever. Less work than a dog. Yeah, I guess that's a good rider reason as well. Like, yeah, less work than a dog. Commercial reason, breeding program, allergies to other pets. Oh, that's a good one as well, actually. Yeah, interestingly. Narinda says mostly elephant and rider was also only for profit and saving the species. Yeah, to be fair, I think if you were saving the species, you probably would have done your research first, well, maybe some research, but perhaps I'm being naive saying, probably I'm being naive saying that. So yeah, absolutely. Right, Andrea says availability. I was in a shop and I could get it. Yeah, absolutely. I'd say that's sort of also a path one as well. Availability, we'll come back to that, but yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. So lots of elephant reasons. Oh, sorry, Lisa says, I thought quite a lot crossed over between the rider and the elephant because logic is often confused and intertwined with emotions. Yeah, that's such a good point. And absolutely, these things are like, they're always kind of clear. They're not always clear cuts. Like they're often linked together. And the fact that we feel good about something, if someone says, why do you own a pet dog? Like really, it's elephant reasons because we feel good about it. But that doesn't stop us from thinking of logical reasons that kind of back up the emotion. So, it makes me go for walks every day. So, that's not really the whole reason we have a dog. Obviously, nobody only has a dog because it makes them go for a walk, because otherwise you would just go for a walk. But at the same time, those things are inextricably linked, and going for a walk makes you feel good and so on. So yeah, totally agree. I think that's such a good point. Leonardo says the rider would be the logical thoughts about getting the animal and all its needs. Yeah, in this case, we're saying we're talking in this case about people who aren't kind of planning for the animal. But yeah, absolutely, if someone was planning for the animal appropriately, then those would be rider things. But again, crossover, because if you're thinking about fulfilling the needs of an animal, that actually does make us feel kind of innately good, doesn't it? Like providing a nice environment, providing the right food and so on. And yes, Mark makes a really important point that what is logical to one person might not be to the next, which I think is a really important point to say. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, so we're obviously talking very generally here, and we're doing this in a kind of quick workshop way, but ideally we would absolutely always do research first so that we can properly understand what's going on for people and what they think, what is rational to them, because yeah, absolutely, some people, and we'll see this I guess when we talk about the training in just a second, you know, it might not seem logical to us, but it will seem very logical to other people. Okay, so we've talked about the rider and also about the elephant there. Were there any factors in the path that made people buy these animals, exotic animals? Lack of laws would be the path. Yeah, perfect, well done. So yeah, so lack of laws. So yeah, laws is such an interesting one, because in some ways they do shape things, like look at tigers, for example. But yeah, people find ways around them as well. So really interesting, but definitely kind of inhibits the path, doesn't it? It's definitely a big barrier, and you have to be quite dedicated if you want to get around the law, but people still do it. Ease of acquiring, that's a great one. So yeah, I know that lots of sites try, and like Facebook, you can't buy any animals on Facebook anymore. But some sites also tries to limit things like exotics. But yeah, so you know, how different would it have been, or you know, it was really 5-10 years ago when you could go on Gumtree and buy any, you know, a meerkat or whatever. Frightening seems now. Yeah, accessibility, lack of laws, and cultural and societal norms. Yeah, that's a great point. I think social norms with exotics is a really interesting one, because I think, you know, as we were saying, sometimes people have exotics as a kind of badge of honor. So in that case, they don't want to be the norm, they want to be different. But then on the other hand, people do kind of follow these norms sometimes. So that's really interesting, like whether people are joining like a community of people that have, I don't know, a tarantula or whatever it is that they're seeing as unusual, or whether they kind of form a community of people who are different, you know, people who are going that step, you know, to have something like unusual and different from everybody else. What else have we got here? How easy it can be to get the animals. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you get mail order sometimes, don't you? Like, sadly, mail order insects and so on. Social construct of the path, extrinsic motivation, social media likes. Yeah, absolutely. Stop the likes and the motivation to post photos reduces. That's such a good point. Yeah, so we do see this a lot with social media, and this is where I don't know, and I'm too old to know about TikTok, but I do need to learn. And this is where, you know, we constantly have these new platforms, and the whole point of those platforms is the way they work is to rely on our elephants, basically, by making us feel good, by getting likes for things. And you know, Instagram is all based on getting likes for photos of things. So yeah, absolutely. And you know, that can be from strangers as well as from your friends. So yeah, totally agree. Jennifer said lack of education. Education is about knowledge. So that's usually what we would think of as like a rider issue. So when you can educate someone to change their behavior, that's usually because it's like a logic thing. They're like, oh yeah, okay, cool, that makes sense. That's like a logic thing. We'll change that. But yeah, absolutely.
Time update, Tam. We've got 20 minutes left.
Okay, brilliant. 20 minutes, cool. Okay, that's fine. So the next group, for which I was in as well, groups 21 to 40. How did you guys feel? Were there things that you guys felt were to do with the rider, first of all, about why people were using dominance-based training methods? So just type in the chat when you have time. Quicker, yeah, absolutely. Understanding the alpha, yep. Lack of education, yeah, absolutely, yeah. Animal safety, yeah, interesting, yeah, good one. Rider, time planning, quicker results, bad information, yeah, perfect. Those are perfect examples of rider things. So yeah, so if it's like a lack of information and people argue with punishment and reinforcement techniques, yeah, sorry, I didn't want to get into the debate about that, but yeah, totally, I know you, yeah. Yeah, let's just for now say that we're talking about excessive levels of avoidable negative experiences for the animals that could be done in a less negative way anyway. But yeah, so rider issues are to do with those feeling that you have the information that this is going to be the best way, the quickest way, the safest way for the animal. Planning, you don't have a lot of time. That's a great point. And you think you're doing the right thing. Yes, absolutely. So for this issue, we do have more rider reasons than we did for the other one. What about motivating the elephants? Do we have any elephant issues that relate to people using the excessively forceful training? Easier, culture and social pressure. Yeah, absolutely. We talked a lot about tradition in our group and people doing things because, yeah, as Karen has just said, we've always done it that way, or my granddad's done it that way, for example. Yeah, difficult to control frustration, anthropomorphize them. Yeah, absolutely. We see that a lot. The animal's just being stubborn. So therefore we can use punishment. We're used to using punishment, so it's a habit to train in that way. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good point. That's why I always try and choose two conflicting issues, because training is something that you will have probably done over time. So we have our habits in it, like the link to our identity. So we talked about that in the group as well. Like you can have your part of your identity built around who you are. So actually, like if you're training the dog and you're like the alpha, that automatically makes you feel like, okay, I'm more confident, this is who I am, which is quite different to the identity that you might build if you built yourself as I'm a positive, I'm an ethical trainer or whatever. Links to your identity, which is again linking to your elephant. But we can have those kind of habits, identities and so on form over time, whereas if you're buying an exotic animal as a kind of knee-jerk reaction to seeing one advertised somewhere, then that's a very different thing. It's not really linked to your to habits and kind of social practices and so on. Yeah, so we've got a few more. So yeah, traditional practices. Yeah, brilliant. The animal only knows how to respond to this sort of training. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, heard at times we're working with actual elephants, e.g. older ones. That's really sad. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so is that elephant? Yeah, elephant and rider, I guess. Like, this is easier. It's tradition both for the elephant and for me. Social pressure is a really interesting one. I think this depends probably what field you're in, because if I was with my dog training friends, then even saying to the dog, what are you doing? I'd be a bit like, ooh. They're like, oh, don't speak so negatively to your dog. Whereas if I was with another group of friends, they'd be like, why are you being so, your dog's like run off and you're not telling her off. So I think the social pressure one is really interesting, because that's going to depend who you're with, and also, of course, what animal you're working with. In the horse world, it's a bit weird not to use a whip. Obviously, with a dog, you'd be seen as very weird and wrong to use a whip on your dog. So yeah, absolutely. But I think those social pressures are really unique to each situation. Okay, and any path issues with the issue of dog training, or sorry, with punishment-based training? Influence from television. Yes, resource availability. Yeah, we talked about resource availability in my group as well, about like, that there's always a new type of control head collar on the market, for example, and or shock collars, those sorts of things. Whips, like if you go into a horse tack shop in the UK, there was like a whole array of different types of whips, and even like sparkly whips for kids with like a star on the end. And you think like, that is kind of weird, because if you had that for any other animal, everybody would be like, whoa, you can't have that. I could imagine giving a kid a sparkly whip to hit the dog with. It's so weird. But yeah, with horses, that's totally normal. But yeah, so resource availability. Mentorship. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so if you want to change, mentorship is a great one. Upbringing, not seeing a problem. Yeah, I think that's kind of a motivational one. Sorry, an elephant type one. Management not providing resources or limiting and making demands. Yeah, that's such an interesting one. So if you don't have the time to do things differently, or you don't have the resources to do things differently, that's a really good example, Alicia, of a path one. And team dynamics. Yeah, nice. Okay, so yeah, if the team are doing the other things, then it's hard for you too. Okay, brilliant. So let's leave it there with that. So what I was trying to show from that exercise, I nearly said from that elephant, what I was trying to show from the exercise was that you can apply that idea of the rational brain, the emotional brain, and the social physical environment quite easily to different issues. And there we've seen with two very different issues how we can differently apply each of those scenarios to better understand what's going on for people. And even though we had two very different issues there, one of them was like about a spontaneous thing, and one of them was about a kind of traditional thing. Both of those issues were primarily related to elephant reasons and primarily related to emotions. And that's what we often see with animal issues, because as somebody wisely said earlier on, animal issues are very emotionally based. As they should be, really. Animals are emotional. We have them because, we feel passionate about them, and that can be a really positive and strong thing. Equally, it can hold us back, but if we can work from the positives, then that is brilliant. Okay, so just move on. If I can make the slides move, that is. I think we were going to go back in our groups for this, but I think maybe we'll just have the chat all together as a group for time reasons, because I wanted to allow a bit of time for questions as well. So, oh, sorry, we've done it. The last one. So what we were going to say is, so let's just think about each of the issues and think about, so if we firstly think about the issue of but people buying exotics spontaneously, if you wanted to change that issue, would you do it differently if you wanted to appeal to the rider? What would you do if you wanted to change that issue by appealing to the elephant? And what would you do if you wanted to change that issue by altering the path that people had? So we'll just apply these to both of the issues. So yeah, back in the chat. And does anyone have any ideas? I'll kickstart you with an easy one. So someone said very sensibly about the path being to do with laws and guidelines and rules around which animals people can and can't own. So one straightforward way, although not always very successful way of altering the path would be if people to change the laws around which animals people can and can't do, or licensing for any animal, for example. So are there examples of how you could make changes if you wanted to alter to appeal to the rider versus if you wanted to appeal to the elephant or to the path? Oops, just going back into the chat. At the point of sale, explain clearly the requirements to keep the animal well. Okay, yeah, so Kathleen says, and that would be like, that's like a rider thing, so like education. So yeah, I guess you could try and like freak people out when you buy them, like, do you realize this tortoise is going to live for like 100 years and you have to sort out your will and everything? Yeah, absolutely, that could yes, that could work well, although we do know that people are pretty spontaneous and don't actually care too much about these things when they purchase animals because it's such an emotional thing. But yes, great point. I'm just checking because someone had a good question in here. I was just going to, so Mark, I'll come back to this in the end, but Mark says, if the majority of reasons sit under the elephant, do you recommend targeting those or start from the other two? That's such a good question. I'm going to come back to it at the end. Yes, so Jackie says laws are important, but nudging towards preferred behaviours is more important. Hearts and minds. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Yes, and every issue, all right, that links to Mark's comments, so we'll just talk about it now. Yes, every issue is going to be different in this case. So I certainly wouldn't say you should always target the elephant. However, if the elephant is the most important thing in the reason people are doing the behaviour, then it does make sense to, at the very least, take into account the enormity of the emotions there, if not, yes, to target the elephant. So yeah, so that links to what Jackie said, because she's talking about, hearts and minds and so on, so nudging people into the behaviour that you want. And some good examples of this are, I'm hesitating to say the word blackfish, because I don't want to, all of these things are obviously very controversial. But a good example of that is when Blackfish came out, that worked for people's emotions and made them feel like it was going to be a responsible thing to share on social media why it's bad to keep cetaceans in captivity, for example. And therefore people, although it was imparting knowledge, basically that's the foundation of the program is built on your emotions and on seeing the images of the whale still in that tank to this day, and it linked to the feed of him still in the, he's died now, I think, hasn't he? Still in the tank, being depressed and just literally sitting there on Google Earth and so on. So yeah, absolutely. I think if you can appeal to the emotions, that generally is the kind of strongest way of making change. But that doesn't mean it's the only way, and it really depends entirely on the individual situation, and that's where your research before you do the project is most important. Yeah, Linda says education in schools for kids about responsible pet ownership in general. Yeah, so that appeals to the rider, and that's a great point. The jury's out on, it depends on the education. So some of those educational initiatives do kind of make a change, but you do have to remember that if kids have a lesson in schools, but they're seeing, their whole lives, the rest of the time, they're seeing completely different values at home, you have to think quite carefully about how you're going to ensure that the lesson that they hear in 2 hours in school is going to stick more than the cultural values that they might see around them elsewhere, or that might be happening in their family or whatever. So yeah, education in schools, absolutely really important, and there have been some great examples, like Dogs Trust have done some good examples of showing that those have made a change, but they do have to be thought about quite carefully. I don't think they're like a panacea. Children look up to teachers. Yeah, that is a good point. Or sometimes depend on the teacher. Children look up to good teachers. Combining the theory with examples from the movies. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so Finding Nemo actually could work. Unfortunately, it just made people buy clownfish, didn't it, I think? But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's such a good point. Okay, let's move on to the other one before we run out of time. So in terms of thinking about people using punishment-based training methods, people in those groups, how do you think we can make a change when we're appealing to the rider by appealing to the elephant, or by altering the path? So again, I'll start off with an easy one. Shock collars have been banned in the UK. You can't buy them. You would have to import them from somewhere else. So it's harder to buy a shock collar. But obviously, that's just one tiny example of a punishment-based training method. Any other examples? Liam, I think this actually goes for both issues. Liam says he wonders about a license requiring a pass or a fail exam. That once achieved, you have to present the license at the point of sale, basically to say that you have enough knowledge, I guess, to have a pet. Yeah, and that actually often comes up, and yeah, I mean, administratively that would be a nightmare, but certainly would be a way, if that could be done, of showing that people have the right knowledge. I guess then we don't know what the follow-up behaviours would be. They could go home and do something completely different, but it would give a chance to educate people before having the animal. Yeah, so Karen says elephants for the training would be showing more of the right type of training in the media. Yeah, that's such a good point. In our group, we were talking about free-flying parrots. Appropriately, we've got this lovely macaw here. I love parrots so much. Oh my God. And yeah, so we were talking about the positive emotions that come from positive reinforcement training versus the emotions you get from more traditional training, which we've probably all done at some point, and how that kind of really feeds into your elephant, as it were, because you feel good about the changes because your animal is so happy, and you've got that reinforcement of them coming back to you, literally reinforces for both of you. Appealing to the rider, explaining the science behind positive reinforcement. Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because that works for some people, and for others they're like, nah, I don't want to know the science, I've always done it this way, whatever. But yeah, great points. Okay, any others there for the traditional, yeah, use the word traditional. Any others for the punishment-based training? So I would say another way of appealing to the elephant is showing how you can make really small, how you can break changes down into like tiny, tiny steps, which people often don't realize. So the animal's behavior problem or training a behavior seems massive, but a good way of working with the elephant is to make the change seem tiny, so it's like really achievable. The rider, explanation of the alpha rule, dogs, alpha position, parents. Yeah, absolutely. Although, again, I have to say, as we said before, I think Cesar Millan and co are so good at explaining it in a way that seems to fit with what people believe about hierarchy, that it's quite hard to just dissuade them with information. So I think that's one where, this is just my personal experience really, but where you do have to appeal to the emotional side and kind of show them as well, because if you just tell them, oh, that's all been debunked now, they're like, yeah, but wolves. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay, but let's leave it there. You get the idea anyway. So if when we think about making change, we can think on different levels. Are we approaching the rider? Are we approaching the elephant? Are we approaching the path? Or are we looking at all three? Showing people extreme examples of what the behavior does long term. Yeah, absolutely, that's a good elephant one. Okay, so we'll move away from the macaw. Yeah, so earlier on I spoke about, I'm just giving you a reminder here of the different types of interventions that we can look at. So education, which is about increasing knowledge and understanding, so that's a rider thing. Training is where you like train someone to do like the mental task or the physical task of the behavior, which reduces the barriers and increases capability. Training is one that kind of covers all three areas. So training makes the task seem easier because you know how to do it. That's an elephant thing. Training reduces the barriers because you know how to do the task. That's a path thing. And also it's you can't really have training without increasing education. So you're also doing a rider thing. So training kind of fits all three. Persuasion is about inducing feelings. So as you all know now, that's an elephant thing. Modeling, something for people to aspire to. As you all know now, what's that? That's an elephant thing. Incentivization, reward, what's that? An elephant thing. Punishment, definitely an elephant thing. Restriction, rules and so on. It's obviously a path thing, and environmental restructuring is a path thing. So those are some examples there of like different ways that you can think about change. And I know we're running short on time now, but I'm just briefly going to say, people often say it's really automatic for any of us, perhaps especially in animal welfare, to say very automatically, oh, we need to educate people. And education is so important, absolutely, but remember that education is important only when there's a knowledge gap. And sometimes if things are embedded if the issue is embedded also in emotional issues, for example, then just giving people the knowledge won't necessarily change their behavior, because remember, that elephant is so much bigger than that rider. A great example, very briefly, is the diversity training, which we have probably all been on courses in our workplaces, you know, where you have like a 1 hour e-learning about don't be racist at work, for example. Everybody knows they shouldn't be racist at work. Everyone knows that it's wrong to be racist. So people are not going to, and I'm not just talking about racism, obviously, I'm using that as an example, or sexist, for example. Everyone knows that those things are wrong, but if people do them, that's not a lack of knowledge usually. That's usually to do with deeply entrenched feelings that they have about those issues of gender or race or homophobia or whatever. So going on a 1 hour e-learning course is doing absolutely nothing but ticking a box for your employer to say that you've done it, unfortunately. This researcher, Katie Milkman, did a study where she looked at thousands of different unconscious bias diversity training workshops and people's attitudes before and after, and found it does absolutely nothing. So that's an example where education is the wrong answer to the question. The issue with people being homophobic or racist or sexist is absolutely not a lack of knowledge. The issue is to do with values and inherent emotions and so on. So changing those needs a completely different approach. However, it does give your HR team a nice tick box to fill. So just finally, I just wanted to mention, so the the types of changes that we now see are very different that we now see in public health are very different to what they used to be. So if we were going to think about making change traditionally, we would tell people smoking's really bad for you, this is why it's bad, you'll get cancer, your lungs are going to be black, it's gross. But now we don't work that way. So now, and I'd love to hear some examples later of from different countries, but certainly in the UK and US, we have programs like Stoptober, which is a month where you have all this support. It doesn't even tell you, at least to start with, why smoking is bad. It just gives the social support, the tips, advice, and so on about how to get through each day until you've built up to a month without smoking. So breaks it down into small, manageable targets, making that path easy for you. Builds on the sense of reward and so on that you get from each stage, so helping through your elephants. And only really at later stages does it bother telling the rider, okay, so this is what's happening in your body now that you've stopped. Couch to 5K I mentioned in my talk this morning. So
and Tam, I'm sorry.
Really... We stopped
sorry.
doing stop.
We'll just, yeah, we do. Well, you can have one more minute to round up, okay, but I'm so sorry. I'm so interested in, I know everyone else is, but sorry to cut you off and play.
No worries at all. Yeah, so Couch to 5K, as we were saying, is literally like tiny little steps that make you feel good, make your elephant feel good, feel like, yeah, I can do this. This is all good. Okay, so my take-home message is, basically, if you want to inspire change in people, remember your elephant. Always think about the elephant. It won't always be that you need to target the elephant, but if you're focusing on the elephant, you're much more likely to be successful than if you only think about the rider, which is what we traditionally do.
Thank you so much, Tam.
Thank you all. I hope that was useful. Sorry we've run over for questions, but if you want to email me, I'll be more than happy to chat with anyone.
Fantastic, thank you so much. And we'll put a few more details about your human behaviour change science and group on the Facebook page and maybe the EASA website as well, so people can get in touch and learn a bit more. I think I'm probably not the only one that just wants to write down a few things I'd like to work those examples on now in terms of zoo animal nutrition, and I'm sure if we were all together we'd be talking about it well into the evening. So I'm sorry to have to cut you off, and I hope that you get some more questions and people you know, getting in touch to have a better chat with you.
Do feel free to email me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone, lovely to meet you all.